My first question is going to be to Phil. Phil, what does the landscape look like in terms of someone like you getting back the freedoms that was lost by those who work directly for government?
Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah, so we're actually a nonpartisan, not-for-profit society that stands for medical privacy and bodily autonomy for all British Columbians. And our membership is primarily made up of current and former members of the BC Public Service, provincial government employees. I myself worked for the provincial government here in BC for 14 years in a variety of policy roles, various different ministries, including the Ministry of Health, Education, Attorney General, and lastly, Advanced Education. I, like over 300 of my colleagues, was terminated for not disclosing my COVID-19 vaccination status. So that happened almost a year ago. I also want to mention there's another organization here today with us, which is United Healthcare Workers of BC. So in BC, the no job proof of COVID-19 vaccination mandate was probably more rigorously enforced than almost anywhere in Canada. And right off the bat, you had in October of 2021, thousands, I think upwards of 4,000 healthcare workers terminated. They're still under a mandate. Sitting next to me, you're still under that same provincial health order mandate, and our healthcare system is in absolute crisis now. Emergency rooms, small rural hospitals and clinics are closing. The provincial government is paying to send BC patients to Washington State for radiation therapy, where they're in private clinics, and here private healthcare is illegal, by the way, of course, and they don't have mandates. So, you know, we're living in a pretty extraordinary time for public services in BC. So our organization has been established to defend the medical privacy and bodily autonomy of public sector workers. Our membership is available to anyone who is a current or former public servant in BC. That's anyone who's worked at any level of government, municipal, provincial, or federal. And we have a legal campaign ongoing against the provincial government for their mandate of public sector workers, and for the unconstitutionality of it, as well as a Section 12 Labor Relations Board complaint for failure to represent against the largest union in the province, the BC General Employees Union, which works hand in glove with the NDP government. So that's a bit about our organization. But your question, just remind me again.
So what are we to do to support people like you guys, for example? What's our role in what your fight is?
Well, I mean, we could certainly appreciate your support, your financial support for our legal campaign. That's going to be going on for many years. Well, hopefully not many years, but for quite some time, we imagine, because the government's very intent in having this power to be able to unilaterally change terms and conditions of employment contracts and to cancel people if they don't comply with very unreasonable mandates. And this is where it's really being tested out in BC, I think, almost more so than pretty much anywhere in the world. They're very, very intent in having this power, and so we're going to be fighting that in the courts. But really just to continue to do what you're doing, to speak out, to tell the truth, to be active, and I think we're going to talk about that, to be active in politics.
Great, thank you, Phil. Dr. Shaw, but does anybody want to jump on there, by the way, before I move on? All right, Dr. Shaw, with Bill 36, is everybody here familiar with Bill 36?
Bill 36.
By a show of hands. Okay, well, all right, I don't have to educate this crowd. With Bill 36 being immediately put into effect and all healthcare professions being under the direct government control, what can healthcare workers do to fight or even reverse this trend?
That's a really good question. I see some of my colleagues, one of my colleagues, Steve Pellick, is here from the CCCA. We talk about this a lot. My other colleagues, Stephen Malthouse here, and that also comes up in the Vaccine Choice Canada discussions. I think we just have to, healthcare workers are just going to have to say no. They're going to have to resist, because every time they get a booster, and the work in CCCA is showing this very clearly, every time they get a booster, they are more immune compromised. Every time they do one, they get sicker. They are more likely to wind up in hospital with COVID or something else. You're making a lot of people very sick, and so if they don't start resisting, they're going to hate to say it, they're going to get really sick, and so they really have a choice. And I think, you know, that old meme you see sometimes on Facebook and stuff. Yeah, if we all just stood up, they would stop, because they would. But we have to all stand up, and that's really what it comes down to. That's a, you know, a unified resistance has to occur in different professions, where people just simply walk out, as they did in East Germany or wherever, and say, "Screw it, I'm not taking this anymore. I'm not doing it." Because until we do that, you know, Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix and David Eby are committed to this agenda. It's become very clear there's an agenda. It's not just that Bonnie Henry is stupider than any public health officer in the country. I don't think so. I think they're all equally stupid, frankly. But the reality is she's pushing an agenda that most have backed off on. And she, in fact, she brought Dina Henshaw in from Alberta to make sure that we get the extra little weight on our backs. So resistance is the only way out, guys. I don't think there's any other way.
I just want to jump in. If somebody pushes you, do you push back? If somebody assaults you, do you defend yourself? I mean, think about it. I mean, it's really quite simple. You know, Canadians have a reputation for being docile, polite. You know, if somebody pushes you, your tendency is to say, "I'm sorry," but you didn't even do the pushing. So the message is true. Be bold and courageous and push back. Stand up for your rights. Otherwise, you've lost them.
If you don't stand up for them, you don't have them. And that's what we've learned.
Hold that mic, Dr. Lugosi, because my next question's to you. As you probably already know, in BC, the trial lawyers associations are facing their own version of Bill 36 coming down the pipes. Now, my personal theory is, because I know personally the people in my healthcare field, most healthcare workers do not know what Bill 36 is. When they become to see that, you know, mandatory vaccination is a requirement for licensure come around summer of next year, there's going to be a round of lawfare, I'm assuming. Is the government trying to intimidate and purge the law ranks from being available to represent the healthcare workers?
I'd like to answer that question in a more general way, if I can, because a technical answer is not going to help anyone here. I think that we have to understand that there is division among lawyers. And the most recent example of that division has been the recent election for the governors of that profession in the province of Ontario, where you had a slate of woke candidates on the one hand, whose advertisements were basically saying, if we don't do what the government wants, we'll lose our right to self-regulate. I think you get it. And on the other hand, you've got the lawyers, like me, who will say, are you nuts? I mean, our responsibility is to integrity, morality, and doing the right thing. We know the difference between right and wrong. And if the government takes over the legal profession, we're going to fight that, because if you recall what Shakespeare wrote hundreds of years ago, tyrants who are kings say the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers. Why? Because they're our first line of defense from tyranny. And so in the old days, lawyers were trained in both law and theology. That's why they wear the black robes. Today, you send your kids to law school, they learn law. You send your kids to theology school, they learn justice. But the ones who graduate from law school all too often have no idea of what real justice is, even if they're brilliantly technical on the law. I just want to add a couple things, and that is, having recalled the very, very long speeches given at Gettysburg in remembering the war dead, there was one individual who bucked the trend of talking too much. He gave his speech in 2 minutes. That was Abraham Lincoln. And he said the Gettysburg Address in 2 minutes, and that's what we remember. So I want you to know that's why I kept my speech short. But if you want to read the entire context, the entire document, I want to give a shout out to Brian Peckford, who's published A Nation of Snowflakes on his website. So this church here, I talked to the pastor, he'd like to publish it too on the church's website. It's not done yet. Brian's already done it. And I have a website, and it's simply lugosi-law.com. And I just want to add one other thing. I should, in the interest of full disclosure, say I was a defeated political candidate for federal election. Heck, I was defeated in running for student council in grade 8. You know, my opponent gave out free pens. I didn't have free pens to give out. It's sort of like the Liberal government, handing out goodies so they keep getting reelected. But years later, after he got released from jail, the fellow who beat me as student council president said, you know, you were really the best candidate. And I said, thanks a lot, Mike. That was very nice of you to tell me. But, you know, the reality is when you're a boy, sometimes you dream of becoming prime minister. And then I decided I'm going to at least try and get into politics because, to me, I had a passion for justice, and I felt that law would prepare me to understand society. And I felt that law was the integrating thread that kept society together. And you know what? I realized politics is corrupt. And I was better as a law teacher, teaching others. And I was better as an advocate in courts, creating new law, persuading judges. But I did run for the Progressive Conservatives, as they then were, in Prince George, Peace River, in 1977, and was defeated by Jay Hill of the Reform Party. People kept telling me, you're the right guy, but the wrong party. They said, why didn't you join Reform? And I said, I would not subject my moral values to a referendum. Because there are other issues of segregation in our society that are in addition to vaccine mandates. You realize the unborn are segregated. They're not recognized as persons. Many in this room are getting old or have relatives that are comatose or in a vegetative state or are being pushed into taking MAID, medically assisted dying. Think about that. They're being treated as non-persons. And I already mentioned this, but look at the agony in our co-speaker's face, the one who spoke just before me, Mr. Buford, the former security detail. He is suffering. And a person came up to me after and said, man, that guy's hurting, and I'm glad you saw that. But you know, we need to stand together. There must never be segregation in our society, no matter what condition we are in, no matter what our beliefs are, and no matter what our opinions are, no matter what our conscience are. We need to stand together and push back.
Thank you. I have a question for Kip. Cryptocurrency has been brandished as a weapon against centralized digital currency. Now, is there any way the government could conceivably control the internet itself to neutralize things like crypto or any other decentralized digital activity for the resistance?
The internet actually originally began as a project out of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research something. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it was a U.S. military project. And originally what it was intended to do was during the Cold War, in the event that things went south, which was quite possible with the Soviet Union, both sides. I think my mic just died. Can you hear? Here we go. And in the event that hostilities had escalated between the two superpowers, the internet would give them sort of a fail-safe, redundant system where if one particular node in the network was taken out, kind of like a spider web, there'd be other ways of routing information from one point to another. In other words, Washington and Moscow would still be able to have a red line, some way of communicating, saying, whatever it is that you just saw or tracked on NORAD, that wasn't us, so please don't retaliate. Because if one side pulled the trigger, you'd make life totally uninhabitable on this planet, even if you succeeded in wiping out the other country. And so that's what the internet was designed for, was to be a fail-safe, redundant system. But at the time that it was contemplated, it also wasn't intended to be in the hands of the normal citizen. It was a military and academic and scientific project, but today we all have it available to us. So if they wanted to shut down the internet, they would have done it already, and they've tried, but it's very, very difficult to do. And so with respect to cryptocurrencies, it's one option that people can use. It's a type of freedom that it can enhance, economic license and freedom. It's debatable whether they're the same. But the problem with cryptocurrencies is that they also mirror the same inequities that are already in the world. So the majority of the world's wealth is in the hands of a handful of people, and that's with respect to fiat currencies. And cryptocurrency, it's basically the same, where most of the Bitcoins, for example, are in the hands of a handful of wallets. So in a way, it just kind of mirrors how the world already is, just in a digital space. And so in that sense, it offers some improvements. You've removed central banks, you've removed control of issuance of currency, but the other more fundamental problems of resource scarcity and inequity, they're still present.
All right, thank you. Now I'm going to give both Vlad and Ron 2 minutes each if there's anything on the top of mind that they want to throw in. I'll start with you, Vlad.
Yes, thank you. One of the reasons why I asked to be part of the political panel is to share my thoughts with you regarding multiple elections that are happening in the span of like not even 2 months. Obviously, we all know Monday will be a critical day for one province, but honestly for the whole country. And you know, I support every single person in this movement because we speak the language of freedom. And I respect everybody's opinion on political parties and possible solutions that can be offered. But I would offer to you to look at things practically, and sometimes black and white is better. Because if you're presented with a choice between NDP and UCP, I think every single person here, if that's the choice you have to make, I think the choice is clear, right? So whatever your understanding or perception of Danielle Smith personally is, it all can be adjusted or at least considered differently when you present it with that kind of choice. Then we have a by-election that just announced recently with Maxime Bernier, and I believe there's even a second by-election that's happening. So that's potential 2 possible seats in the House of Commons that, you know, potentially can go PPC route. And then we have Chris Sky in Toronto, the biggest city in this country, running for the municipal election for the mayor of the city. And guess what? I support everybody. I support UCP, Danielle Smith, and then as well as I support, you know, a couple of candidates within Independence Party within Alberta. I support, obviously, by election in PPC vote, and then I support Chris Sky in Toronto. How can I do that all? Well, because I understand that if we are to win this war, and Kip did phenomenal presentation on that, we have to leverage every single opportunity we can to make a difference and move forward on the game board. Do yourself a favor, try to take the emotions out of it and look at things black and white. We are in the war. Would everyone agree we are in the war? So can we act accordingly to that statement, please? And then do our best to like just be rational, thinking like you are in the war, because you are. And regardless of whatever happens in all those elections, guess what you get to do? You get to choose how you show up after the results of the election. And the way I choose to show up, and I would offer the same to you, is I am a free Canadian regardless of anything. I choose that every single morning when I wake up, I'm free Canadian. And with respect to, you know, constitutional structure of this country, Bill of Rights is incredible. I would strongly suggest look at both documents. Just compare the two, even as a child would. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Bill of Rights. Look how colorful one document is and how almost black and white one is. Look at wordings that are used even in the quote. Who read a quote by Trudeau underneath the Charter? Who read that quote? Please do that. And reflect on what it says there. And then read the quote that says underneath the Bill of Rights, where it says, I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to oppose what I feel is wrong, free to stand for what I believe is right, free to choose those who shall govern my country. And this heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind. Can you imagine we do that? And imagine, continuing to the education panel from before, imagine you do that with all your children every single morning. First thing in the morning, what you do is you read that quote underneath Bill of Rights, and you make sure that your children know that by heart like I just did. Can you imagine how different this country will be going forward? That's what we'll all need to do.
There was a very good point was just made, and I want to refer back to Cowichan. Some of the people who ran with me as United Independents, they've been amazing. They said they would be the opposition. They are the opposition. They show up at every meeting. Serena and others show up at the school board meetings. We've got councillors in North Cowichan who live in dread when Joe Enslow and Adriana Richards get there because they go, oh my God, we're going to get it again. That's what you got to do. You're going to be the opposition. You stay with it. You didn't win the election. You stay with it. It doesn't matter. You're still the voice of reason. Yeah.
Well, fundamentally what we have to realize is what's really going on in the big picture, because there's so many different things coming at us, and unless we can see the big picture, we're going to have a difficult time fighting it. And really what's happening is you have UN Agenda 2030 coming at us, you know, in 2019, I was saying like a freight train. And it was the Conservatives that brought that to Canada, and Trudeau and the premiers are implementing it now. And so the UN can talk all they want about anything. They can go ahead and have their human rights, or they could have UNDRIP or whatever, but it's only going to be enforced in Canada when the politicians, you know, bring it on. And so this is why we have to keep on top of these guys and let them know. I mean, everyone should be contacting their councillors, their mayor, for the town and for the county, and they should be contacting them, you know, the MLAs and the MPs on all these different topics, and just swarm them, you know, and let them know that you know, what their decisions, you know, the thing is that a lot of them go along to get along in order to keep their jobs and their money that's coming in, but they have to realize that their decisions are going to destroy the very essence of what we have here in Canada. And I'm glad Brian Peckford's here, because I wanted to get you a message for a long time. And that is, were you here last night when I talked about UNDRIP? No? Okay. All right. So Bill C-15 was passed in 2021, right at the time when they had the residential school hoopla thing, right? Kind of good coincidence there. And then so the senators, you know, definitely were under pressure. But so all Canadian law has to be consistent with a declaration called UNDRIP. It's the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Article 46 says basically that no state, person, or group can do anything contrary to the Charter of the United Nations. So what I've been trying to tell people is that we're essentially under the Charter of the United Nations as an overbody, you know, direction of, you know, of where we're going to go. And that has to be really looked at, because it supersedes, I think, our charter. So.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Okay. So you've been very patient. I'm about to release you on break. When we come back, we're going to have our final two keynote speakers of the evening. The Honourable John Rustad, our one and only, I believe, BC Conservative Party member MLA. As well as, of course, Brian Peckford. So can we give our panel one final round of applause, please?